OWS fam, the nation, my dudes and dudettes, welcome to a special edition of Best Ball Plus brought to you by 1 Week Season. As you can see on down below, today I will be joined by industry expert Chris Wecht of FantasyPoints.com. He is a data analyst and a tools builder over at Fantasy Points, does a lot of their behind the scenes work, and he will plug a product that they are launching here shortly. Before we get into that, Best Ball Plus, what are we trying to do here at 1 Week Season? Best Ball Plus, we try to design this product to be able to tailor it to similar to something like a one-on-one coaching session. And in order to do that, we designed it to provide podcasts and video casts every weekday from the end of the NFL draft to the start of the NFL season. So that's 18 weeks, 5 podcasts per week. That's 90 podcasts that we are pumping out, covering strategy, covering theory, and covering basically trying to teach how to make more profitable decisions in a best ball draft. You're not going to get a lot of pick this player type stuff from us. As you, whoever's familiar with 1 Week Season knows, we are trying to train you to be better at the game itself. So with that, I'm going to welcome my guest for this podcast today, Chris Wecht of Fantasy Points. How we doing today, man?
I'm doing good. Excited to be here. I when you told me you're doing a daily pod, when I just hearing you say 90 shows, I didn't know, it clicked to me how many that was. That's awesome, man. I
Yeah.
love talking about best ball. People love hearing about best ball, and yeah, I think everything you guys do over a 1 week season is awesome. How you talk about the game theory more than the, like you said, pick the player stuff. And excited to get in with you on some best ball game theory talk.
Yeah, man. And we've had a very good working relationship with Fantasy Points in the past because you guys are very, very data driven. And it's a very cool marriage when we're able to combine those two facets. So stoked to have you on, stoked to jam. And we're going to talk about some things today with the schedule release. Obviously, the primary thing that happened yesterday, the schedule released. And now the whole best ball world is talking about week 17. We know the expected value of week 17 in these major best ball contests is where most of the EV is at. We know it is important. So we're going to talk about the NFL schedule release. We're going to talk about a little bit of week 17 strategy. We're going to talk about what to expect from the field, so some potential field reactions. And then we're going to talk about some potential ADP movements. And a visual aid that you provided for the show, going to plug you here for a little bit, is going to help us out as we continue on this journey. And these are the week 17 matchups with the associated major ADPs for the major skill position players on each team. Talk me a little bit about why this is valuable to have this kind of visual tool.
Yeah, so obviously to do, you mentioned it's very plus EV to have some kind of game stacks built into your lineup. We can talk about how many and what's optimal and everything, but mainly you're going to need to know, okay, when I take Kelsey in the first round, how does that set me up to take not only Mahomes and other KC players later, but now can I build a game stack off it? Because, especially a player like Kelsey where he's likely going to have a high advance rate. He's likely going to stay high in advance rate through the playoffs, assuming he continues to do what he normally does. You really need him to hit like ceiling outcomes in those playoff weeks for it to even matter if he's different or not from all the other lineups you're playing. So you're going to need if you get him to the finals, you really need that KC Cincinnati game to go off. So when you take Kelsey in round 1, what does that set you up to do on the Bengals side of things? Obviously, you're not getting Chase. It might push you to reach for Higgins a little bit in the second round or reach a little bit for Burrow in the fourth. And, you got to kind of weigh the cost balance of if that's worth it. I'm usually a bigger fan of taking the ADP values, but I do think there's a couple spots where you might be okay reaching a little, but you definitely don't want to go crazy with it because somebody else is out there getting that same stack as you at a value.
Yeah, and we talked about the NFL schedule release, week 17, how that's going to manipulate some of the expectations from the field as far as ADP, as far as game stacks, all that kind of stuff goes. Really what jumped out to me were 4 primary games from the week 17 schedule. We've got Cincinnati, Kansas City. We've got Detroit, Dallas. We have Miami and Baltimore, and everybody has fresh in their mind what Tua and Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill did against Baltimore last season. and Arizona, Philadelphia. Did you see any other ones that jumped out off the page to you from the Week 17 schedule release?
Those were definitely the four main ones I saw. I think Chargers Broncos could be interesting if we see, a little bit what everybody thought the Broncos offense might look like last year, come back, get a little closer to what we thought. And then the Chargers hopefully also have a better offense with new offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. So I think that one's got some potential, but it's not on the level of those four that you mentioned. I don't think there's really any other ones that really stand out to me, but maybe Pittsburgh, Seattle, if Kenny Pickett takes a step forward. But yeah, definitely those big four are the big ones.
Yeah, and there was a lot of uncertainty in how you kind of answered that question, and we're going to cover why that's important as well. This idea of recency bias with respect to Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh and then Russell Wilson in Denver particularly, and those offenses, pretty wide range of outcomes that we'll talk about here shortly as well. But talk me through kind of your process in putting this together and really let me rephrase. The way that you described this sheet and the values where the field is likely to be paying attention to, they're likely looking at primary stacks, likely looking at the potential to reach in the early rounds to complete these primary stacks. The one you brought up is it's highly unlikely that people are going to be able to pair Travis Kelce and Jamar Chase. Potential to reach for T. Higgins, Joe Burrow, depending on if Patrick Mahomes falls to the Kelce drafter in the first round. With that understanding, what are some ways or things that we can be thinking about if we do jump on Travis Kelce in the first, or if we do jump on Jamar Chase in the first?
Yeah, so like from the Kelce side, T. Higgins current. So this table basically shows the current ADP from Underdog as of yesterday when I pulled it, and where guys are currently basically going. This is going to shift a lot, obviously, and will be a big edge now that we know the Week 17 and trying to see which guys we think might move in certain ways. So for Kelce, when the Kelce owners are very often trying to get Mahomes in the second round when they draft him. That doesn't always happen though. Now with the Cincinnati matchup, they have an alternative option to go for T. Higgins, who currently is an ADP of 24.8. So basically the 2-3 turn. The Kelce owner might say, I don't have a huge lean on Higgins and some of these other second round wide receivers. Let me just take Higgins here and get the correlation boost. So Higgins is ADP. I would not be surprised if that doesn't get more firmly into the back, mid to late second round because of that. And then obviously as you get farther down in the draft and the ADP gets, bigger and bigger, things can not matter quite as much. You'll see guys reach for guys maybe a full round ahead at certain points. Maybe they'll fall past the round ahead in certain points if if nobody has that stack built out. But yeah, you really want to just have kind of a game plan of what things you can do when you take, especially those early guys. And then certain teams are going to be harder. Like Green Bay is a team that doesn't have a ton of guys going high in ADP. Green Bay, Minnesota is actually a little bit of another sneaky Week 17 game. You can, if you miss, maybe you take Kelce and you can't get Mahomes. Maybe Higgins gets sniped on you too, or, you don't want to reach, which I think is a fair argument as well. You can still build out a late Green Bay, Minnesota stack, something like that. You don't have to have Justin Jefferson. It could just be a couple one-offs. Just have a plan of what you can do, especially with these early picks, because, those are the guys you're going to need going off late, because we're not great as a industry predicting, those super late round guys and who's going to go off late, who's going to be the Jerick McKinnon of this year. Some other guys we've seen in the past. Jeff Wilson has had stretches that Mostert was a guy like that last year. Stuff like that.
Yeah, you mentioned we're not good as an industry at predicting these late round. I don't like using the term like flyer or dart throw, but these late round players, we're also not good at predicting what's going to happen 5 months down the road. Yes. I mean, talk about, we still have 17 weeks until the regular season starts, and then we have a full 18 or 17 weeks until this stuff really even matters. So we are not good at projecting things 34 weeks into the future in a game with so much intrinsic variance as the NFL and then as best ball. So with that said, what we're trying to do is we're trying to maximize our expected value per each roster, each entry that we put into these contests, and allowing variance to kind of take the wheel at that point. But there obviously things like roster construction, things like optimal theory, things like what has been proven via numbers to be optimal in these drafts. Obviously, all of that is kind of our building blocks. When we start getting into the heavier theoretical aspects and how we can manipulate expected value in our favor, now we're talking about things like exploitations of the field, our field tendencies that we derive from our observations of what the field is doing. And when we get the schedule release like this, those observations are highly likely to lead to those major ADP movements that we talked about earlier with these primary stacks. And we started this discussion with Kansas City and Cincinnati for a very particular reason. One, it's likely to be the highest game total of week 17, assuming some highly variant act like Patrick Mahomes got, I don't even want to say it on air, but something like Patrick Mahomes getting injured or, all the variants that can happen from between now and then. But we also got that game leaked a couple days before the NFL schedule release. So that has led to some of these early movements, that has led to some of the field tendencies of reaching to complete these stacks. And when you take that into this like theoretical exploration of manipulating expected value in our favor, there's some early things that we can be doing to place ourselves in this realm of unique roster construction. So, for example, like on a roster where I'm taking Travis Kelce, I would now be more inclined to bypass the T. Higgins, Joe Burrow side of that game and look for the secondary contributors like Joe Mixon, like Irv Smith late, like some of these guys that can produce more as the season goes on that are currently being super undervalued. I mean, Joe Mixon has had some significant ADP movement. He's jumped about 2 rounds over the first 10 days that this contest has been open, but to me, he's still relatively undervalued based on expectations. And obviously a lot of that goes into his performance last year. A lot of that goes into, we didn't know, or the Bengals going to release Joe Mixon. But as you can see, like as the draft cycle, the entire draft window continues on, we're going to continue to see these ADP movements. And Joe Mixon was a guy that I identified rather early as a likely climber in ADP. So I was targeting that as soon as we got that leak for this Kansas City Cincinnati Bengals week 17 game. You see any other potential late guys from that game that could see their role grow as the season moves on?
I definitely like taking shots on a number of the KC wide receivers. Is it Sky Moore? Is it Kadarius Toney? Is it Rashee Rice? I think everyone's going to have their favorites. Personally, I really like Rashee Rice. I think they invested highly in him with the draft capital, the second round draft capital. And I think there's a reason that, Sky Moore had issues with Mahomes last year being where Mahomes wanted him to be and stuff like that, kept him from getting off the field. Toney can't seem to stay healthy to save his life. So Rashee Rice is my personal favorite. I'm not going to kill somebody if they think one of these other guys could really be the KC guy you want. I mean, Kadarius Toney could I don't know if he could be the wide receiver 1, but he could be a top 10 wide receiver easily if he stays healthy and plays with Mahomes all year. So taking shots on these different KC late guys, I definitely think they'll start to rise with how popular Chase, Higgins, Burrow starts are going to be and stuff like that. Because it's just so easy to start Bengals and then tack on these late game stack KC guys.
Yeah, and what you're speaking to is this idea of ambiguity. We don't know what that wide receiver room is really going to look like, and what we've seen in the past from Kansas City is they don't really care. It's like they'll mix and match. They have different personnel groupings that they'll utilize. They have all kinds of things that they're doing via their offensive game plan. And it's like Patrick Mahomes will just go out there and be Patrick Mahomes, and it doesn't matter really who he's throwing to. But that said, obviously, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, these are more archetype of wide receivers similar to Mecole Hardman. They're these like queen chess pieces that they can move around the formation. They can design these schemed plays they can look to get one-on-one coverage with. very different from a guy like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, where he's kind of this, like, I like to call Marquez Valdez-Scantling the safety manipulator. They utilize him to manipulate safeties on the back end, primarily against cover 2 quarters, not so much against man coverage, because there's different things that they can do to really effectively manipulate safeties out of man. But the NFL as a whole is moving towards more of a 2-high base. What that means is 2 safeties on the field, and they can play cover 2 press, they can play quarters, they can play quarters press, lots of different things that you can do from that 2-high safety shell. And that's really where the NFL is moving. So when you talk about a guy like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, do you see upside in his profile where he's kind of this just like safety manipulator? Do you see any upside in that profile for him specifically?
Funny enough, I mean, he's got the latest ADP of all these KC wide receivers, yet I think he's probably the favorite to run the most routes this year. So like, he's going to be on the field. He's going to get there. Like you said, they're going to use him to manipulate defenses to give them other looks. Sometimes the defenses aren't going to do what they expect, though, and he's going to get these deep shots that really nobody else gets on this team in the same level of volume that he might get. You know, you're going to get a lot of duds. There's going to be a lot of down weeks, but that's not really the point in best ball. You're looking for the spike weeks. He absolutely could be a guy you need in any of the playoff weeks, or in week 17 in particular, that pushes your Bengals stack that, you know, wins you all the money. But yeah, I think he's definitely has a value as, you know, going the latest and yet going to run the most routes with Mahomes throwing him the ball.
Yeah, completely concur. And look at his ADP, 157.7. He's at the 14-15 turn. So we're not talking about like investing this significant draft capital. Big things for that. I like targeting these cheap guys on top expected offenses. And when you're doing it with a guy like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who has this deep role, he has this kind of archetype where he can provide those spike weeks. And really, you're looking for maybe 1 or 2 contributions to your offense as your wide receiver 7 or wide receiver 8. And you're looking to sneak that into a game stack from one of these top game stacks that we're talking about here in week 17, to be able to have that when it matters, really. I mean, if he goes 4 for 110 and 1 in week 17, that's probably a separator type score.
Yep.
As he's going to contribute to your roster. So definitely like that discussion on Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Anything to, I guess, talk about with this Kansas City Cincinnati Bengals game before we move on to Detroit Dallas?
I think we covered it pretty good. What are your thoughts on like the late Bengals guys? Are you not really into them at their ADPs and whatnot? They're tough.
Yeah, it is tough. Like, I think that's a good way to describe it, but you have to kind of, I think the way that I kind of break this down to keep it straight for myself is, what kind of archetype of player are we really talking about? Is Tyler Boyd ever going to see his role in this offense grow? Like, I guess the way that I teach it is, what's the best case scenario for Marquez Valdez-Scantling versus Tyler Boyd, for example? The best case scenario for Marquez Valdez-Scantling is he connects on more of these deep shots than he did last season. The best case scenario for Tyler Boyd is, like, even if one of Jamar Chase or T. Higgins gets injured, is his role in this offense going to grow? Highly unlikely at this stage in his career. So he's a guy I'm a little less singling out as somebody to attack. Obviously, Tyler Boyd is a guy who can be valuable in a Kansas City Cincinnati Bengals game stack or a Cincinnati team stack. But outside of that, I'm not really looking to go out of my way to target that kind of profile. What about you?
Yeah, that's pretty much the only way I'm targeting him. It does, like, if you do start Kelsey Mahomes, you miss out on Chase, Higgins. Mixon is the next logical guy, but you know, even that doesn't feel like awesome from a game stack perspective, and like, unless Mixon has like that 5 touchdown game that he had last year, but it's definitely possible. And then Boyd is kind of like, yeah, your last option, but you don't feel great about it. The Cincinnati KC side just looks so much more appetizing when you get the, you know, Cincinnati stack and then the late KC guys.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess my middle to late targets on the Bengals have been Joe Mixon and Irv Smith primarily, to answer that question, I
Yeah.
think, completely. Dig it, man. Let's run over to Detroit and Dallas. What are you seeing from this matchup?
So this one, you obviously can't put together the top two guys on each team, Amon-Ra St. Brown and CeeDee Lamb. Tony Pollard, actually, you can throw in that mix too. You're probably not getting any of those three guys together. So then it's you're going to be, you definitely can do it with a bunch of their late guys though. You can go Amon-Ra St. Brown and then build up a Dallas side if both QBs are going pretty late, that you have a lot of flexibility. You're just not going to be able to stack the top guys together, which I think is fine. I think Cooks, I think Gallup can provide you a spike week in week 17 to win it all. I think on the Lions side, Jamison Williams absolutely could. I know we haven't really seen him play, but all reports and when he was drafted 2 years ago was that he's got wide receiver one ceiling to him. Sam Laporta is interesting. That's probably about as far as I'm willing to go with the Lions. I don't think you need to reach down to Marvin Jones, Josh Reynolds really all that much. Montgomery is another guy. We saw Jamal Williams score plenty of 1-yard touchdowns last year. He could easily be that guy. So it does offer you a lot of flexibility after those top guys. You're just not going to be able to get the top of these, offenses stacked together.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that the top two options, or I guess the top option on both of these offenses, are more of a slot presence, more of a volume presence. Interesting to me because we have guys going later like Jameson Williams, who we expect to be kind of their Z-type wide receiver, their downfield, their manipulate over the middle of the field. And we saw him score a deep touchdown on a late breaking in route last season as well. And that's kind of what I'm looking to see out of this offense that is more primarily designed to spread a team horizontally. And Jameson Williams is that piece that's going to push the offense downfield. So I like that call. You're going to have to get creative from a roster construction standpoint. Obviously, with Jameson Williams set to miss the first 6 weeks of the season. But now with the extended season, we have 14 weeks of contributions in that first round. So it's a little bit less pertinent to us, but we do have to game plan if we are attacking a guy like Jameson Williams, who's going to miss 6 weeks. But I like that call. On the other side, there's actually a player on the Cowboys that I've been targeting rather heavily that's not even on this list, and that is Malik Davis. Have you had any, I guess, do you have any feelings one way or the other between Deuce Vaughn and Malik Davis in Dallas?
It's shocking to me that Deuce Vaughn is getting drafted ahead of Malik Davis. I mean, Deuce Vaughn is he's not going to be anything in the NFL, really, unfortunately. He's just too small to really do a lot, do impactful things as a running back at this level. He'd be the outlier of all outliers. It just doesn't really work, unfortunately. I'm taking shots on Malik Davis as a massive leverage over people drafting. I know Vaughn still has a round 18 ADP, so it's not like he's always going. But the fact that Davis isn't even regularly drafted is pretty crazy to me. I feel kind of confident that they do bring somebody else in at some point. I'd probably put it at like 70% that they add somebody. I don't know if it's bringing back Zeke or some other one of these other free agent running backs that is out there. But yeah, in terms of what it's currently laid out as, I'd much prefer Malik Davis to Deuce Vaughn.
Yeah, and that's a good point, is that kind of variance that we just don't know what's going to happen with this backfield. But last season, we saw Malik Davis take on a higher role when in week 17 when Tony Pollard was injured. So that's an interesting, and I said that we weren't going to talk about players, and we're talking about these players for a very specific reason, in that there are going to be very few combinations in this contest of a guy like Jameson Williams paired with a guy like Malik Davis. Yep. And you're still getting that essence of this week 17 correlation. But you're doing it in a way that the field is quite simply just not doing. Malik Davis is leaving most drafts undrafted. Even the the tight end room here in Dallas of Jake Ferguson, Luke Schoonmaker. There's a lot of ambiguity with that situation, but it's highly likely that one of these guys is going to see some spike weeks. Is it going to be Jake Ferguson? We don't know. Is it going to be the rookie Luke Schoonmaker? We don't know. I prefer Jake taking some late shots on Jake Ferguson. He's been around the league for at least a year, so he's not a rookie tight end. But again, pairing a guy like Jake Ferguson with Jameson Williams, getting that like understacked week 17 correlation component on rosters on one of the expected top game environments for week 17 is something that I'm looking to do rather heavily. Any other ideas or thoughts on this game before we move on?
I do really like getting Sam Laporta in a good amount of spots. The Brad Holmes has been talking about a ton how much he loves, what Laporta can do as a receiver. He's going to be he's probably going to be their starting tight end right from week one. We've seen that role be valuable for them, whether it was Hawkinson or Brock Wright or Shane Ziltra or whatever other tight ends they were thrown out there at the end of the year.
The halfback tight end hybrids.
Yeah, crazy. So yeah, I definitely like getting Laporta in different spots to do this week 17 correlation. There really is a lot of late options with these two offenses. This could easily be the highest scoring game of the week if KC Cincinnati duds in any way.
That's a good point to bring up and a very natural bridge to the next game that we're going to talk about in Miami and Baltimore. We saw what happened week 2 of the 2022 season when these two teams met. And this is one of my favorite cost versus upside games to attack for week 17. What are you seeing from this game from a current landscape perspective?
So of the ones we've talked about this so far, this one really lays out nicely based off of where the ADPs currently are. Tyreek Hill goes in the first. If you wanted to build out the Miami side of that, you can still get Waddle in the second, and Tua then goes all the way in the 8th. And then in between there, if even if you started Tyreek, Waddle, you could still, you could have Lamar Jackson be your QB in round 3. The only thing you can't do then is pair Lamar with Andrews. Or you flip it, like I said, you start Tyreek, Waddle, get Tua late, and you throw in Mark Andrews in the 3rd round. So this is, of the ones we've talked about so far, this one definitely offers you the cleanest landscape in terms of how the ADPs currently fall to stack up the top end guys. And then if you don't get an Andrews or something and you still want to build that Miami week 17 stack, you grab your favorite Baltimore late wide receiver, Flowers, Bateman, Odell Beckham are all going pretty close to each other late. And, they go, other than Flowers, they all, they don't block you from taking Tua in the 8th round if you need Tua to complete your Miami stack.
Yeah, this Baltimore team is one of my favorites to be attacking in these early drafts for 2 very particular reasons, really. One, the ambiguity, the uncertainty that's associated with the changing dynamics of their team. They're moving from a dinosaur age offense to now Todd Monken, who is this 11 personnel base, and we are going to do all these layered route trees and interesting things on offense to get our playmakers in space. That is basically what his offense boils down to. So while that is super exciting, we also have the other component that makes it this one of my favorite situations to attack, and that's Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews, and the fact that they don't currently line up to be able to take both. There's a lot of theory that goes into when do I manipulate that from the perspective of BBM, where the draft window is 3.5, 4 months long. It's a little bit lower EV to be reaching on Lamar Jackson or Mark Andrews in the second to be able to pair with the other. When we talk about that compared to a contest like the Puppy, where the draft window is only 10 days to 14 days long. In a contest like the Puppy, I've been targeting those two fairly significantly and reaching to do it because their ADPs don't line up. And we don't have this extended draft window where the ADPs could move to where later on in the season, they could line up more naturally for players to complete that early round stack. So what are your thoughts on that idea of tailoring game plans to specific contests with the overall like draft window in mind?
No, I think that's super sharp. It's definitely something you've got to be mindful of, particularly with BBM and just how ADPs are going to be shifting over a 3-month span versus the puppy that is, max like 2 weeks long. Yeah, if the goal is to draft as if we're right, you take Lamar or Andrews for that matter, either one for them to hit their ceiling and pay off their draft capital probably means the other is also doing pretty well. So you reaching a little bit to take Lamar in the second or Andrews in the second, whatever one, is probably not a big deal in the grand scheme of things if you hit on it. So yeah, I definitely like doing that in tournaments like the puppy. Maybe you get lucky and they fall to you at the turn there at the back of the third, and you can just double tap both of them. That feels like something I would like never pass up if that happens.
Yeah, that's happened to me once in my, I think 50 something, 52 drafts that I've done so far. It happened to me once, and it was on a team where I already had Josh Allen, and I was like, I'm still doing it. I'll just make this roster super unique and different.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, at that point, right now, where things stand, the ADPs just don't line up, and it's very, very rare that we see both Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews fall to that 3-4 turn. There's also a lot of ambiguity with the pass catchers. Baltimore went out and signed Odell Beckham to his 15 million that he was looking for. They drafted Zay Flowers, and they have a former first round pick in Rashad Bateman, who's coming back from a Lisfranc injury. So there's a lot of ambiguity with that. And my personal rankings, if you're looking for those are available for Best Ball Plus subscribers at oneweekseason.com. But my personal rankings, I have Rashad Bateman ranked as the top wide receiver on this offense. And it's interesting that we're starting to see a little bit of breakout where the field is siding with Zay Flowers here. From a skill set and how we expect this offense to run and the roles of these wide receivers, do you have any breakouts between those three, Zay Flowers, Bateman, and OBJ?
Bateman would be my preferred guy of the three as well. I think Zay, he's going to start the season as their slot receiver. The problem is Mark Andrews is also basically their slot receiver. So I don't know, at least early on, how effective Zay Flowers can be for this offense. He's definitely going to be a boost to the offense, but from him putting up fantasy scores perspective, I think he's going to it's just going to be a little bit tough for him. He definitely can play on the outside, but I think they want that to be Bateman and Odell, at least as long as both guys are healthy. I really do think Zay probably needs an injury to somebody to really break out. So it is interesting that his ADP is starting to pull away from these other two guys. I mean, Bateman is probably the Linsfeck injuries are definitely nothing to shy about. We've seen Julio Jones be limited by them. After that, it's an injury that has limited a lot of wide receivers' careers. And Odell, who knows really what we have in him anymore. So I get why people don't want to click those guys. But in terms of if all else is equal and everybody is healthy and everything's good, Zay definitely probably has the worst outlook from that standpoint if everybody else is healthy and good and ready to play.
Similar discussion on the other side of this game with Miami's backfield. We have Devon Achane being drafted late by Miami. We have, well, not late, in the middle of the draft this season. We have Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, who both were brought back from unrestricted or as unrestricted free agents on 2-year deals. And again, the field is more significantly siding with Devon Achane here, when his athletic profile it is highly unlikely that he is going to be more than a 8 to 12 kind of per game touch running back for the Dolphins. Can he return value from the perspective of Spike Week in this offense with his blazing 4.3 speed? Most definitely. But it's interesting to me that there is this full 3 to 5 round disparity between those three running backs with the field siding with Devon Achane. What's kind of your, I guess, how are you seeing this situation from the Miami backfield?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty similar to your take. He's going to have to be a guy that's a little bit of an outlier. I mean, that being said, it is like if there was a team that he could get drafted to, this is probably the best fit given the type of run game that they use and the run concepts that they use. his speed is just gonna, we've seen the Mike McDaniel was excited to draft him, press conferences and everything. It just shouldn't be that far of a gap between the three of them. Even you go back to his San Francisco days, they've really never leaned on one guy, even when all guys were healthy. I like Mostert still has a ton of speed to his game. He just can't stay healthy really. But so him and A-Chain should probably be going pretty close to each other. I'm fine with Jeff Wilson being the third guy in that list, but I think Wilson's totally viable to take shots on late. I'd probably will be drafting more Mostert Wilson than I will A-Chain, just given the cost.
I'm completely with you. And this goes back to the previous discussion we had on like the best case scenario. What is the best case for scenario for Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson? It's probably that the other one misses week 17 or the other one gets injured and misses 4 weeks during the middle of the season or whatever. That's probably best case scenario. And in that instance, they are now primarily having the early down role to themselves, which is going to be extremely valuable because A-Chain is going to be, I think, the way my read on that situation is he's going to be like the change of pace, the third down kind of guy, and they're going to utilize him with these unique looks. But he's not going to be a guy that's going to step into 16 to 20 running back carries per game, unless both Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert get hurt, which is completely viable based on their age, their injury history. And it's interesting to me too that all of these guys are these sprinters. A-Chain, Mostert, Wilson, they're all like these 4-3-4-4 sprinters, and it makes sense knowing what they do on the NFL field, why they're picking up these soft tissue injuries. I mean, these are sprinters who are asked to go from 0 to full speed 20 to 40 times per game, depending on their snap rate, on what they're asked to be doing in this offense. So these guys are probably going to be picking up some soft tissue stuff. And I don't like the negative connotation that we get with these guys and some others around the league where that injury prone moniker comes into play. Well, it's like, yeah, they're sprinting at full speed 40 times a game. They might pull a hammy along the way. But interesting digression there for me, but kind of how I'm reading this situation. But when you pair those two things together is really where the theory comes in. We have this ambiguity in the Miami backfield. We have this ambiguity amongst the pass catchers in Baltimore. We have this idea that Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews don't line up in ADP currently. There's a lot of fun stuff that you can do from this game stack, primarily in the puppy, but also in the BBM, the way that the current draft landscape is set up. So I love this game. Those are the primary reasons. Any other guys from either of these offenses that you're really excited about or looking to target late in drafts?
Now I think Braxton Berrios, Gus Edwards, Isaiah Likely, they're probably fine in stacks, but not really guys I'd be looking at really much at all.
I dig it, man. Let's jump over to Arizona and Philly. I think they're up here, right?
I think they're at the bottom, actually.
Yep. Boom. Put them up on the screen there. And talking about ambiguity, man, one side of this game in Arizona, all of it, there is so much uncertainty associated with this team. And then we move to the exact polar opposite in Philly, where they have a very high level of continuity. What are you seeing? What do you make of this game?
Yeah, so I mean, I think everyone's biggest fear with this game is it a blowout, and do some of these Philly guys not even play the full game? But then you get into the argument of they've got to score points, to make it a blowout, and somebody's probably having a good game then for that to happen anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in there. Look at AJ Brown and his 3 touchdown game from last
exactly.
year. They're all in the first half.
Yeah, exactly. And the way the ADPs shake out are pretty, Philly's expensive, but Arizona is not expensive at all. Hopkins is the most expensive guy. We're not even sure if he's going to be on the team by week 1.
Yeah.
So you can do pretty much whatever you want when it comes to stacking this game. I definitely think it does make, Kyler Murray probably a little undervalued going in the round 11. I mean, he gets a nice string of games in general from weeks 15 through 17. I think it's San Francisco and Chicago are the other 2 games. So all games he could potentially have to do a lot of damage in us, and we expect him to be healthy by that point in the season. So yeah, I kind of like starting, if I start AJ Brown or Devontae Smith or both and don't get Jalen Hurts for some reason, throw Kyler in there and then draft Rondell Moore and Zach Ertz or something late. And you've got a nice, pretty little game stack that could be pretty viable in week 17.
Yeah, that's interesting too. And we'll lead directly into kind of one of my main points about this game. It's the running backs from each team. We have Philly, who we know that they will play 2.5, 3 quarters in a blowout and then bring in backups or like take their foot off the gas in the fourth quarter. And we have all this ambiguity associated with their backfield in the sense that they like to utilize 2 to 3 running backs on a weekly basis. So DeAndre Swift going far before Rashad Penny and Kenneth Gainwell. And either of those latter two guys could be like a viable piece you needed from this week 17 matchup, particularly speaking to the case where it's a blowout. So, I mean, and Rashad Penny is a guy who's going to be involved regardless, that could pick up some additional run in a blowout type game scenario. And we know his per touch upside is off the charts, particularly now moving to one of the top offensive lines in the league. So really like Rashad Penny. And on Arizona's side, one of my favorite targets on Arizona is Keontae Ingram, who is going basically undrafted in most drafts. We look at what the makeup of Arizona is. They have a one back system. They like to utilize a borderline workhorse back. Obviously, there's some ambiguity that goes into that with the coaching scheme change, but they have James Conner, and then it's like they did nothing behind James Conner in the offseason, either through free agency or the draft. And it's like, okay, well, we have this second year guy in Keontae Ingram who they obviously like enough to keep around through this regime change in Arizona. And it's like behind him, there's really not a lot going on in the way of depth. So Keontae Ingram playing behind again, don't like to use injury prone, but a guy who has picked up some significant injuries over the course of his career in James Conner and with very little depth behind him. A guy that I really like mixing into rosters as my RB5, RB6, particularly in these rosters where I have a member of Philadelphia to get some of these secondary correlations going. Any other thing to add, I guess, from either side of this game?
Yeah, I think the running backs are definitely interesting, like you said. I do think Arizona is another sneaky landing spot for a Zeke or Leonard Fournette, some of these free agent guys. But even then, like you said, James Conner can be injury prone, and Ingram is suddenly then the RB2, and the other guy is, an old kind of dusty running back that we don't think is really awesome anymore. So they're, even as a round 18 pick, even if they add another guy, he's, that's a totally solid pick at that cost. And then the Philly guys it's tough to swallow a 4-round difference between Swift and Penny, and even bigger one between Swift and Gainwell. Really, any of them could have a big game in week 17. So yeah, if you do, draft a Marquise Brown, I like, and you need a running back to fill out your roster late, throwing in a Kenny Gainwell or Penny, depending on where you are in the draft, definitely makes some sense.
I dig it, man. I got nothing else to add on that game. Let's talk real quickly about why are we so focused on week 17 with this podcast? There's been numerous studies that have been done. I have done a lot of work in proving the expected value in various rounds in these contests. Mike Leone over at Establish the Run has done a lot of work proving the expected value. And the primary contributors to the expected value from the BBM this season are week 17 and getting out of your draft. So advancement rate and week 17. The primary contributor is week 17. And that is why we are so concerned with the schedule release, the week 17 games that we're going to have. And the Leone in his Best Ball Mania manifesto that he released this season basically proved via maths and the numbers what correlating a roster for week 17 does to your expected value per roster. And he found that it's more than a 50% increase to expected value if we find this perfectly correlated for week 17 roster. So that is the why behind that is driving like the how of this methodology and why we're so interested in week 17. And the other piece of that kind of comes into play through roster construction theory and what is optimal from a game stack. And a lot of this comes from DFS methodologies. Obviously, it's not a perfect mirror from DFS where it's a salary cap game to now best ball where it's a snake draft and we get more information. But optimal game stack theory would mandate that every quarterback is paired with 1 to 2 pass catchers, running backs included, and an optimal correlation or game stack theory would mandate exactly one bring back in that game stack. There's obviously a lot that goes into that is optimal, but we don't necessarily need optimal to win these contests. We don't have the field isn't 677,000 players at that point. It's 441 teams. So we don't need to win a Millie Maker at that point. We need to win a single entry, most likely 441 person contest. So there's things that we can do within those constructs, but we have to have that understanding of what optimal is to be able to make these deviations. And I like to call them exploitations through theory. Instant reactions to any of that week 17 discussion?
No, I think you nailed it. Yeah, what's optimal is not necessarily what you have to do, but just, yeah, it's important to keep that in mind because you probably don't want, 4 guys from team 1 and 3 guys from team 2. That might be a little bit of overkill. I'm curious your thoughts on taking 2 like this Philly Arizona. Are you avoiding Kyler plus Jalen Hurts because you kind of only want one to shoot out in that game?
I am. So I've actually thought a lot about that, and my answer is I'm more inclined to game stack 2 quarterbacks from a week 17 game where both quarterbacks are going higher in ADP. The reason for that is it's a little bit easier to create a Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray roster. It's a little bit easier to do that when compared to like a Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow roster. We're going to see a lot fewer of that type of roster constructions in play. And obviously, taking 2 quarterbacks in the first 5 rounds is a dent to expected value for that roster. But that goes into this entire discussion of exploits on the field. Right. The fact that it's just not going to be owned at all. I think there's some interesting ways that you can do. And I've done that a few times over my first 50-something drafts, these early quarterback week 17 pairings.
Yeah, I think that's that's something I've thought about and struggled with a lot last year with thinking, do I want to have both guys from team? But I think that's a good take that, there's going to be plenty of people that can do Hurts plus Kyler, but there's not going to be a lot of people that do Mahomes plus Burrow.
Yeah. And talking about like we have to first get to week 17 as well. And those quarterback pairing allows you to do a lot of fun stuff. We'll talk about it. We'll say it like that throughout the rest of your roster to be able to bring that together. I dig it, man. Let's talk now. We'll transition. We'll close this off by talking about major expected ADP movements now that we do have this schedule release. We covered the top 4 expected game environments. You threw in Minnesota and Green Bay as this potential for a shootout type game environment. Are there any other areas or games now that we have the schedule release for week 17 that you see influencing ADP to the point where we start to see some major ADP movers?
It's tough to say because I honestly, on the whole, I don't think there's like a ton of games that really do look like they'll shoot out. I really do think that's those top 4 that you mentioned, maybe top 5 with the Minnesota Green Bay one that'll really drive ADP. T. Higgins sticks out like a sore thumb to me as a guy that's going to start getting more and more expensive for the reasons we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Other than that, though, I do think people are going to want to do this Detroit-Dallas stuff too. So Tony Pollard maybe starts to creep higher and higher up to pair. Although I guess you can't really stack him with Amon-Ra even if he does start to creep up. But Gibbs certainly could start to creep up to stack with Lamb and stuff like that. I think people are going to really like that game. Detroit also has a nice week 15, 16, 17 schedule as well. Yeah, it's there's not a ton of games that I think people are going to obsess over, other than the KC Cincinnati, the Detroit Dallas games. I think are the top two, and then the Miami Baltimore Arizona Philly are kind of the next tier. And we already said the Miami Baltimore ADPs already kind of line out pretty nicely. Maybe it does push Lamar and Andrews earlier into the third round for the Hill and Waddle drafters to pair with them. Those are the ones that stick out the most to me.
Yeah, I think I was trying to find it, and it was right in front of me the whole time in this Chargers and Broncos game. That would probably be the ADPs that I could see being most influenced, and it's primarily probably going to come from the Broncos side. They have been so cheap this entire offseason. I mean, Jerry Jeudy going at the 4-5 turn, and then it's nothing until round 8, Javonte Williams coming off a major knee injury. And then it's like Cortland Sutton is the wide receiver 2. You have Tim Patrick, the wide receiver 3, who's going in the 18th round, undrafted sometimes. I think we're going to see those later guys like Greg Dulcich, Marvin Mims, Tim Patrick, even Russell Wilson, available in the 11th round currently, start to creep up now that we know that they have this potential shootout type game environment. But yeah, really outside of that, it's hard to envision other games being the like had to have it game. But from a theoretical standpoint, do you see merit in attacking some of these other game environments that are expected to be a little bit lower scoring, or these game environments where they're just kind of being shunned off or just allowed to be passed through the cracks from the field?
Yeah, two other ones that stick out to me: the Buffalo, New England. I mean, everyone loves to stack up Buffalo. New England is basically entirely free outside of Ramondre Stevenson. I would be shocked if some of these late guys don't start going a little bit earlier. Tyquan Thornton, even Mike Gesicki, Mac Jones. Nobody really wants to take any New England guys, but people love to draft the Bills, so they're going to want to stack them with somebody, and they're not always going to be able to get Ramondre. And you can't even. I mean, Ramondre does seem like he'll probably start to go a little bit earlier himself because of this. But that's a game that could definitely shoot out. We haven't seen a lot of New England Buffalo shootouts, but Buffalo gets up by enough, New England's going to have to try to do something. And then Atlanta and Chicago is the other one, with Chicago being a pretty popular offense, at least in Fields, DJ Moore. And then, you sprinkle in the ancillary guys. Atlanta has a lot of guys going early in the draft with Bijan, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts, despite not really being viewed as a very high output offense. That could end up being a game that does get a little sneaky with two bad defenses and just the offenses being good enough to put up bigger scores.
Yeah, and the problem that I think is going to be a major impingement to Atlanta and Chicago is the fact that the field has these biases against both of these offenses.
Right.
Like Atlanta and Chicago were the two run heaviest teams last season, two of the top 5 slowest pace teams. They grinded out styles, but you look at their defenses and it's like, well, they could just be a case where Bijan and Justin Fields are allowed to go absolutely bonkers. Along that same line of thinking, just on the left-hand side here with San Francisco and Washington, we now have a Shanahan versus Bieniemy setup, and we've seen what has come from that in the past. Obviously, Washington is not Kansas City, but there's some interesting pieces for Washington. And what is most interesting to me is the fact that we have 4 players on Washington that are being drafted in the first 11 rounds. You have Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Brian Robinson, and Antonio Gibson. But the quarterback that's supposed to be quarterbacking this offense and leading this offense is way down in the 17th round. We talk about like DFS theory and porting some of the things that we do in DFS over to best ball. One of the things that we like to study at 1 week season is when we find disparities like that, when we find ownership on like 2 pass catchers for an offense that's expected to be 20 to 30%, yet their quarterback is expected to be like sub 2% ownership.
Right.
We have that similar setup with Washington this season. And yes, a lot of it goes into the uncertainty with Sam Howell. Who's going to be the quarterback? Is it going to be Howell? Is it going to be Jacoby Brissett? I would guess, at least to start the season, that we're going to see Sam Howell be the guy. Whether or not he maintains that role is going to largely depend on how Washington is doing. Are they still in the playoff hunt? Do they want to? How is Sam Howell performing? So if Washington gets to weeks 14, 15, 16, 17, and they are within the playoff hunt or a wild card spot out of the NFC, and Sam Howell has got them there, they're probably going to continue playing Sam Howell. If we get to week 7 and Sam Howell is not performing and they are in the playoff hunt, that's probably when they go to Jacoby Brissett to try and change things up and keep them in the playoff hunt. But if they get to week 14, 15, 16, 17, and they're out of it completely, I would think that they're going to continue with Sam Howell as this 21-year-old quarterback to try and develop him, see what they have moving forward. So there's a lot of unknown uncertainty, which is probably holding back Sam Howell's ADP currently. But this disparity in primary skill position players versus the quarterback is super interesting for me from Washington. Anything to add from this game with this now Shanahan and Bieniemy matchup?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the Washington QB scenario with guys going. The San Francisco side is basically the same thing. I mean, you've got McCaffrey, Debo, Kittle, Ayuk going all before round 6, and Lance, Purdy, and Darnold, they're all super late. One of these quarterbacks on both sides is going to be a value. I don't know which one. We think Sam Howell for Washington. San Francisco is really up in the air. I mean, Shanahan's yesterday making comments that Lance stinks, but then is also looking best he's ever seen. So who knows with that one. But I definitely do like taking shot. I'd probably, if I'm drafting in Best Ball Mania, where it's, like we talked earlier, it's multiple months and going to run all the way up to the start of the season. If I'm taking shots at either of these quarterbacks, I'd rather do it now and hope that I got it right. Because as we get closer, we're going to get more and more clarity, and whoever is the favorite is going to get more and more expensive.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever seen a situation where a team is the betting favorite to win their conference, and we have no idea who their starting quarterback is going to be. It's crazy. Dude, that was an absolute blast. Thank you for joining us here at 1 Week Season for the Best Ball Plus. Give a quick shout where the peeps can find you, where they can find your work for us.
Yeah, at Chris Wecht FF on Twitter. You can find all my stuff on FantasyPoints.com. I don't do a ton of content pieces, mostly behind the scenes stuff, but I do plan to start doing some more best ball pieces and whatnot as we move through the summer. We do a best ball stream, me and Scott Barrett and Thomas Tipple from Fantasy Points every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. So check that out. And we're launching the super cool. I think it's going to, revolutionize the fantasy data industry. Basically give every person that wants it access to high-level advanced football data and manipulate it and make cool stuff with it however you want. And, coverage schemes, rush concepts, just everything you could ever want as a fantasy player all in one spot.
That was a perfect segue. I will be joining you and Scott next Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on your podcast. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to continuing this nice working relationship that we have with Fantasy Points. And for all my OWS fam, again, this is a segment pulled from the Best Ball Plus package subscription. If you're looking to jump into the waters there, head on over to oneweekseason.com, search Best Ball Plus, or click the top ticker at the top bar and get in these Best Ball Plus streets with us, man. This is one of the fastest growing sectors in fantasy football realm. And I only see it getting higher and higher, and the ceiling on these best ball contests getting more and more. Look at the growth of Underdog over the last 4 years of their existence. We have now gone to a $15 million prize pool on their flagship contest. So this best ball is here to stay. Come learn with us, come grow with us, and we will see you in them draft lobbies, and we will see you at the top of the leaderboard.